What if I told you painkillers might be making you a jerk? There's been significant research in the past couple of decades that demonstrates that emotional pain and physical pain are deeply intertwined. Specifically, physical pain and emotional pain operate on many of the same neural pathways and parts of our brain and can be affected by one another. In this video, I'm going to talk about some of this research and specifically how it might shape our social interactions. Pain is a subjective experience and relies on certain interactions between our default mode network and our salience network, two separate networks in the brain. We'll talk about these two in other videos, but briefly, the default mode network is what tells the story of the world around us, condensing broad experience into a single narrative. And the salience network tells us what to perceive in our environment or even what to notice in our environment. The sensations of these neural networks cause us to experience physical pain, showing a clear reasoning from an evolutionary adaptation. A creature who does not recoil from a dangerous environment or painful experience may be less likely to survive. Similarly, for a social species, it's possible that emotional pain, like we might experience from social rejection, is a similar adaptation, allowing us to adjust our behaviors to better live as a social species. Remember, survival of the fittest isn't just about individuals, it's about the species that can learn to adapt and care for one another. Modern research is confirming this neurological relationship. Some research had people take acetaminophen or a placebo for 3 weeks and found that doses of acetaminophen reduced reports of social pain on a daily basis, and that acetaminophen reduced neural responses to social rejection in brain regions previously associated with distress caused by social pain. Other research identified that social exclusion in a game of catch producing acute emotional distress was blunted by taking acetaminophen. Specifically, researchers noted that a part of the brain in the salience network, which shapes what stimuli our brain focus on, specifically the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex and the anterior insula, was activated by the experience of social exclusion, causing the subjective experience of emotional pain. That pain was also inhibited by taking acetaminophen. These parts of the brain determine, in part, what parts of our environment we should focus on, meaning the social exclusion becomes less relevant to our experience when consuming acetaminophen. Now, this may sound like a positive. Just take some Tylenol to get over a messy breakup. But it comes at a cost. These same parts of the brain are active when we experience social connection. Indeed, other research found that this neurological response is also related to empathy or our ability to feel the pain of others. In double-blind studies, painkillers made people react less to learning about the pain of others, witnessing social exclusion, or being blasted with loud noise. Whether from physical pain, emotional pain, or just chaos in our environment, it's all distress to the salience network. Around 25% of adults use acetaminophen on a weekly basis. What does this suggest about our social experience if we're numbing empathy as well? Some of those same researchers also found that acetaminophen could blunt positive empathy as well. Although some research suggests there may be ways in which in-group versus out-group empathy may be affected differently for reasons not fully understood, or that differences in gender may matter for how this effect is experienced, particularly with ibuprofen and potentially other NSAIDs, likely for social rather than biological reasons, having to do with how men are already socially pressured to minimize their own emotional pain, changing how the salience network brings experience to the conscious forefront. It isn't just pills either. Alcohol is a painkiller. While it lowers your pain, it lowers your empathy too. Researchers examining its analgesic effects found that it both made people less sensitive to their own pain, but also more likely to cause pain to others. In fact, the research found that the more alcohol people consumed, the more readily they inflicted pain on others. It lowers our inhibitions, perhaps making us easier to talk to, but also less likely to notice the pain of others. There's a lot of ideas here that we're going to keep talking about on this channel, from subjective cultural experiences of pain, to how the salience network in the brain interacts with the default mode network, to the specifics of how a given painkiller works to change our perception of pain. When and why and how we choose to numb our pains, and what drugs we reach for when we do, are social and cultural acts. The readiness with which we numb our pain also numbs us to the pains of others. We should be thoughtful about what pains we choose to numb, how much, and why. So what does this all mean? Well, here's a few final thoughts. First, it's important to understand that one of the key ways most painkillers seem to work is by changing not the amount of pain that we experience, but how much our attention is drawn to the pain that we experience. Our subjective experience of the world is about filtering down that complex data coming from outside and inside our own bodies to create a singular, meaningful experience of the world, a singular story. Shift the attention away from pain, you shift the subjective experience of pain. Second, how these painkillers work, because of how that process is filtered by our own histories, experiences, and even our identities, becomes subjective and works differently for different people. Giving painkillers to someone who has been socially trained to minimize their own pain, you'll get a very different result than dosing somebody who has been taught that how they feel matters. And last, this subjectivity matters not just for the individual experience of pain, but for how we use that pain to relate to others or not. Our ability to function as a social species requires us to get into the minds and experiences of others. And our neurology has adapted structures to accommodate. But how we train those structures matters. Whose pain we attune ourselves to matters. Which pains we feel, which pains we numb, which pains we share, and which we keep to ourselves all matter and ultimately change the ways that we develop relationships and even our very sense of right and wrong. In a world that regularly seeks to numb individual pain, are we losing a sense of our collective pain?